Memphis Grizzlies history was made on Thursday night. No, unfortunately, it wasn't on the basketball court. That went actually pretty poorly. But for the first time in the history of the Memphis Grizzlies franchise, two members of the organization will represent the team in the All-Star game itself. Congratulations, not just to Ja Morant, but on a more surprising note, Jaren Jackson Jr. Both are heading to Salt Lake City. We'll talk about that and much more on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another episode of Locked On Grizzlies. I am your host, Joe Mullinax, flying solo on this episode. DeMichael Cole, very busy with the back-to-back for the Memphis Grizzlies. Of course, as the beat writer covering the Grizzlies for the Commercial Appeal makes total sense. So I, Joe Mullinax of GBB fame, no longer with Grizzly Bear Blues over at SB Nation, but I do write for SB Nation NBA and Fansided. I have a Substack called Written in the Dark that covers the Memphis Grizzlies exclusively. So I know a thing or two in my decade covering the team, and I'll be happy to take you through this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. But first, I want to make sure that we shout out our sponsor for this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. We are proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every day. We are free and available wherever you can get your podcast, Stitcher, Spotify, Apple, Google, anywhere you can get a podcast, you can find Locked On Grizzlies. You can also find us over on YouTube. Like, comment, subscribe there as well. The comments have really been taking off the last couple of episodes. It is truly appreciated from DeMichael and myself. Continue to do that. Interact with us there. Give us your input, your takes as the Grizzlies continue this current struggle, tailspin, abyss descent, whatever you want to describe it as. It's not going well for Memphis right now, at least on the floor, but off the floor. Let's start with some positivity, some energy. And there is nothing more energetic than seeing a young person, man, woman, whatever, get an honor that they truly deserve for the first time. And that's exactly what we saw on Thursday night when Jaren Jackson Jr. was announced as a reserve for the NBA All-Star game. We'll talk about snubs here in a moment, but I just really want to start with acknowledging the special nature of what happened on Thursday for both Jaren and Ja Morant, the first pair of Memphis Grizzlies players to ever make the All-Star game together in the same year. Obviously, rising stars. There's been multiple Grizzlies, or there's been a skills competition guy, three-point shootout, and then somebody else makes the team. Those things have happened before, but never in the history of the Memphis Grizzlies franchise have two Grizzlies players made the actual All-Star game main event itself. And that's really a special and fun thing to see. Jaren Jackson Jr. is having a Defensive Player of the Year caliber season. In fact, depending on the sports book you look at, hopefully it's FanDuel, the sportsbook partner of Locked On Grizzlies and Locked On in general. Jaren is the favorite at this time for Defensive Player of the Year. He continued that energy in his game taking on the Portland Trailblazers on Wednesday night. Looked especially impressive there. Another 5-block performance. Didn't play against the Cavs, and we'll talk more about that here momentarily. But he just was really impressive and continues to be impressive, putting up unbelievable numbers as a defensive player, blocking shots, playing in for steals, stocks, deflections, just making life miserable for opposing offenses in and around the rim. He is a blast to watch on that end of the floor, and he continues to find himself offensively as well. I wish his teammates would have found him more against the Portland Trailblazers. There were a lot of mismatches that could have been exploited against Portland that were not exploited. We'll talk again more about that here momentarily. But Jaren's claim to fame right now is his defensive effort, his defensive tenacity. The Grizzlies, again, one of the top teams in the NBA, number 2 seed in the Western Conference. Makes sense that they would get a second guy. But Look at the names that didn't make it for the Western Conference. We're talking De'Aaron Fox. We're talking Anthony Davis, Devin Booker. You can argue a lot of these have to do with health, right? Not playing enough games, being absent, out, all that sort of stuff. Remember, Jaren's missed a sizable chunk of the season himself. So the coaches who select these reserves for the All-Star game, they clearly acknowledge the special ability that Jaren Jackson Jr. has defensively, the growth he's made as a player, and they found him worthy of this spot in the All-Star game. Ja Morant being there, much less of a surprise, right? Ja not being a starter, if it was positionless, you would imagine that he'd be one of those 5 guys in the starting lineup, but because there's only 2 backcourt spots, it's hard to argue against Steph Curry and Luka Doncic. Hopefully, even though this is a Grizzlies podcast, you can agree those 2 guys are deserving names. So you can't really say Ja was robbed, given the way that the system is structured. But he was going to be a reserve, and that's exactly what he is. He's one of the top 10 or so players in the National Basketball Association. He continues on any given night to be a walking highlight reel, potential triple-doubles galore. He's done that multiple times in recent games. He can do pretty much whatever he wants on the basketball court. So Morant being in that mix, not surprising. Jaren getting deserved recognition. I want to stress that too. Just because I'm surprised that Jaren made the team doesn't mean that I'm surprised that in a bad way. Like, I'm surprised that he shouldn't have made it in terms of his physical ability. He definitely should have made it in terms of his physical ability, the numbers that he's been putting up, the success he's had for the Grizzlies this year. He's the best two-way player on the team. Ja Morant is obviously the superstar, the best overall player. But when it comes to defensive and offensive impact, it's not particularly close. It's Jaren Jackson Jr. So for Jaren to receive that honor, to see the video of the team celebrating with him, that much lauded chemistry that constantly gets brought up in conversations about potential trades and all those sorts of things, that was on display on social media. The video was shared by the Grizzlies Twitter account. Just a lot of fun to watch those guys get to celebrate with Jaren and let him know how much he means to them. I'm sure this honor means a lot to Jaren. It's validation for a lot of people. Obviously, first and foremost, it's validation for Jaren Jackson Jr. That's the most important thing. He is an all-star. He is an all-star level player, no more. He is legitimately an all-star. It's validation for the folks that supported the pick all the way back in 2018. And I'll be honest, I was at the Grizzlies draft party there in FedEx Forum in 2018. Grizzly Bear Blues, the site that I was running at the time for SB Nation, had a draft party with the Memphis Grizzlies. We were a part of their draft festivities, and we were doing a live show there. And Jaren Jackson Jr. was the pick, and I was not super stoked by that pick because I thought that the team was trying to continue to contend with Mike Conley and Marc Gasol still on the roster. The guy that hates everything and makes fun of the Grizzlies, Chandler Parsons, that one, that guy. He was still under contract. There was hopes that grit and grind would continue. And I was thinking they would take somebody that would maybe be a more direct contributor to that. Jaren Jackson Jr. was viewed as a project, especially offensively. But Peter Edmiston, kudos to Peter, former host of this wonderful podcast and program. He took me aside and he talked me down off the ledge. And he said, this kid can be something special. Just let him develop, let him cook, let him work. And I trusted Peter, as I trust him now, 5 years later. And Peter Edmiston looks pretty smart on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies because he was exactly right. Jaren had tremendous potential then. That potential is beginning to be realized now. It's a lot of fun to watch young players have success like that in this league. Oh, speaking of young players, both Ja and Jaren, 23 years old. So there's been a lot of conversation and debate about rebuilding and contending on Twitter and elsewhere. And obviously there's going to be some dissension whenever there is a team like the Grizzlies trying to walk that line. And I think we all can agree, you and I can agree that they are walking the line. They are not rebuilding, of course, but they are also not truly contending. They're trying to keep their future options open while being as good as they can be now. That is a weird middle ground that not a ton of teams are able to navigate. And as the Grizzlies try to walk that high wire themselves, it's a friendly reminder of the job that they have done. Obviously, Jaren Jackson Jr., not a pick of this current front office. Ja Morant basically fell into the lap of the Grizzlies at number 2 overall in 2019. But still, you have two franchise cornerstones to build around, in addition to Desmond Bane, who plays at all-star caliber levels himself. It's going to be a lot of fun to watch these guys moving forward. So congratulations, Jaren Jackson Jr. I hope you get a chance to enjoy and really get to compete and just take in all the fun stuff there at All-Star Weekend with your boy Ja Morant. We're going to talk about the on-the-court product and where things have been going wrong during this tough stretch, these two losses for Memphis and this back-to-back next year on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, this episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. As a small business owner or hiring manager, you know that success in 2023 all depends on the team members that you surround yourself with. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. With LinkedIn Jobs, you can hire qualified candidates more efficiently by matching open roles with people who have the skills, values, and experiences to help you achieve your goals. LinkedIn Jobs can help you quickly attract qualified candidates to your open jobs with various targeting tools. You can identify the most qualified candidates on LinkedIn Jobs and connect with them fast and for free. LinkedIn Jobs makes it easy to screen and rate applicants based on your job qualifications, all on one platform. It's 2023. We're into February now. You are trying to make this the right year for growth and development in your business. The right team member can help you do just that. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus the leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnba. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnba to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. We will talk on-court struggles for these Memphis Grizzlies next here on Locked On Grizzlies. Do not go anywhere. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am your host, Joe Mullinax, once again flying solo on this episode, missing my good friend Michael Cole of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Grizzlies beat writer. He's a busy guy. I don't know if you heard or not, but Jaren Jackson Jr., who we just praised for being in the All-Star game for the first time earlier in the show, did not play against the Cleveland Cavaliers. Not only that, Dillon Brooks didn't play the entire game against the Cleveland Cavaliers because he decided to do something that, this is a family-friendly podcast. So I want to make sure that I choose my words carefully here. Dillon appears, there might be conflicting reports. Dillon may never admit to it. It appears when you watch the camera footage that Dillon Brooks took his hand and probably purposefully struck Donovan Mitchell in the groin while he was rolling over on the floor. I can't confirm or deny if Brooks meant to do it, but I can tell you as someone that has played a lot of sports, somebody that has played basketball a lot, not at the level of the NBA, of course, but that is not a natural movement, if that makes sense. That doesn't mean that accidents can't happen, but for your hand, usually you're going for a different ball, right? You're not going for that type of area. And because of that, after watching the clip, seeing Dillon roll over, it almost looks like, depending on the camera angle, he looks up to try to see where he is, and then he lets his hand do the talking for him. I don't blame Donovan Mitchell for reacting the way that he did. He was pretty angry. When you get hit in the man region, it's no fun. So they both scuffle, and Dillon gets tackled by a Grizzlies security guy, which is a pretty impressive form tackle, I will say. And both of those guys get ejected. And that mess was indicative of the Grizzlies against both Portland and Cleveland, because the Grizzlies continue to look like a mess at times. Against the Portland Trailblazers, it was a dramatic fourth quarter collapse. Portland outscored them by 16 in the final frame, and Memphis had no answers for Damian Lillard and Anthony Simons down the stretch, which is slightly concerning because that defensive front court is a valued piece of what they're trying to do. If Ja Morant and, Desmond Bane didn't play against Portland, or he did play, Desmond Bane played, but it was, coming back from injury, first time in a few games, getting his feet back under him. To see those two guards go off the way they did, that's something that Portland can do in a playoff series. That's something that Portland can do on any given night. They have those tough shot makers. It's not like it's luck when it comes from, especially Lillard, but even Simons is capable of doing some of the things that he did against Memphis on a nightly basis. It's not luck, if that makes sense. Against Cleveland, against Cleveland, it was a lot of the same in some ways. The Grizzlies continue to struggle defending the three. Ricky Rubio looked like Steph Curry at times, which is frustrating. That's not Ricky Rubio's game, to say the least, launching threes, but he made several against the Grizzlies. Again, Dylan Brooks gets out. Danny Green doesn't play, second night of a back-to-back after making his debut on Wednesday. So you are limited in the wing department already. John Conchar back from his concussion. Not a ton of contributions there offensively. Jake LaRavia got some run. Looks like the game's way too fast for him right now. Doesn't appear ready to be a contributor at the NBA level in really any way at this time. Doesn't mean he can't be down the road. And Zaire Williams didn't get a ton of playing time in this game, which is mildly surprising considering how important Zaire has been discussed as being. And he only played 4 minutes, and that was in mop-up duty. He didn't play until the end of the game. So Zaire was on the injury report going into the game, and maybe that's part of the thought process. He's a little bit banged up, a little bit sore. Didn't want to give him a normal allotment of minutes. But once Dylan Brooks went out, Zaire has been viewed as a guy that needs to contribute, be a part of that rotation, and help steady that reserve unit. He hasn't been successful of late. You could argue he hasn't been very successful all season, but in my opinion, the fairest way of putting it is of late. And he didn't get much run against the Cavaliers. So I wonder if that was Dylan Brooks's absence that made Taylor play him at the end of the game. If Dylan was still there, would Zaire have even gotten in? There's questions that will never be answered in terms of, can Memphis make this a competitive contest? They obviously did not down the stretch. It was another collapse. It only got worse as the game carried on. And credit the Cavaliers and Trailblazers, right? Portland competing to try to get back into the playoff conversation. The Cavaliers are one of the better teams in the NBA, top 10 team in the league. So if you're not going to play up to your capacity, outcomes like that are going to happen. But there's a growing sample size that is worthy of concern if you are a supporter of the Memphis Grizzlies. The three-point shooting of opponents, especially on the road, at some point it's schematic, or your team can't execute the scheme the way that's supposed to be executed, and you need to replace a piece or two with better pieces. One of those two things is the truth at this stage. It's not about, oh, wow, gee, gosh, golly, those guys are just shooting really well. We see time after time again, overhelping on a drive, kick out pass, Shetty Osman hitting massive shots, multiple threes. Again, Ricky Rubio, multiple threes. These are guys that shouldn't be cooking the Grizzlies from the perimeter, especially Rubio, that are able to do so in part because of the space that they're provided through the scheme that the Grizzlies run. Missing Jaren Jackson Jr., we already know that's massively important. They are a middling at best defense. Without Jaren, they're the very best or among the best in the NBA with him. So not having Jaren hurt against the Cavaliers. But Jaren was out there against the Trailblazers, and Dame and Simons were still able to go off. So the perimeter defense is something that remains a concern. Bench production remains a concern. Outside of Tyus Jones and Brandon Clark, who can you trust to make plays on this Grizzlies team? You can't trust Danny Green right now. He looked rusty in Wednesday's game against Portland, and that's understandable. That's not a knock on Danny Green. He hasn't played basketball in a long time. It was his first game. But Memphis is in the middle of trying to maintain their hold on the 2 seed in the Western Conference. The trade deadline is less than a week away now. They are running out of time, and they have to have a good handle on what Danny Green is able to give them if there is a plan to make a trade in the near future. Maybe there isn't a plan. Maybe they're happy with who they are. We've talked about that a lot on here, and I'm going to try to be better about not repeating myself. I think they have a plan very clearly. I don't know that it matters in the here and now if that plan connects to immediate title contention. You could be competitive and not contend for a title. The Grizzlies, of course, are very competitive. How they respond at this trade deadline is going to be fascinating to watch. They legitimately need help shooting threes. They are not good enough at it. Defending the three, maybe more practice time. We'll talk more about that here in a moment on the show. Reasons to be positive going into the weekend here. There are reasons to be optimistic. But if they are not able to fix these things internally, that means the issue is from within, and it has to be addressed from the outside. If you wait until the draft, which they have the assets to do if they see fit, in theory, you're adding young talent. You continue to build the core of the roster. But what if the core is already established? What if they're already there? What if you are in a position where you could make the NBA Finals this season and you're a player or so away and you're choosing to not fully engage that reality in exchange for continuing to look to a title window that'll open wider gradually as time goes on? That's the question that we'll continue to debate, discuss, and work through here on Locked On Grizzlies. But enough negativity. I want to be positive. There's things to be excited about going into the next month of Grizzlies basketball. We'll talk about that next here on Locked On Grizzlies. But first, I want to shout out our wonderful new partner over at Locked On. That is FanDuel. Very excited about FanDuel, the new sports betting partner for Locked On, because they are the #1 sports book in America. And if you're new to FanDuel, that's even better. They have so many great features that make betting on sports easy and fun. Download the FanDuel app now so you can bet Super Bowl 57 with a no-sweat first bet. You'll get up to $3,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. FanDuel lets you bet on everything from the money line to point spreads to who will score a touchdown. It's going to be a lot of fun betting on the Chiefs, the Eagles, overs and unders, who's going to score first, how long the Super Bowl is, all those fun props, all those sorts of things. And then, of course, the actual quarter by quarter, yard by yard, score by score breakdown. You get it all at FanDuel. The Sportsbook app is safe, secure, super easy to use. And best of all, you can get paid your winnings instantly. Join FanDuel today at FanDuel.com/lockedon to claim your no-sweat first bet on Super Bowl 57. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL and new friend of Locked On Network and the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. We talk positivity, reasons to be optimistic heading into February for the Grizzlies next here on Locked On Grizzlies. Welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am your host, Joe Mullinax, flying solo on this episode. Thank you for joining me wherever you are, listening, watching. It's appreciated. Michael Cole will be back with me next time we're together on Locked On, and that's not going to be until Monday. And the good news about that is the Grizzlies only have one game between today's Friday episode and the Sunday contest that they have against the Toronto Raptors. And that is one of my reasons, ladies and gentlemen, for being optimistic about the current state of things for the Grizzlies. Now, don't get it twisted. I'm not optimistic about how things are going in terms of wins and losses. It's really difficult to do that when you've lost 7 of your last 8. But there is reason to be positive that things will improve. One of the first things that I want to point out about all that is a tweet from your friend and mine, Michael Cole, of the Commercial Appeal, in which he talked to Taylor Jenkins in a press availability about the stretch that the Grizzlies are going through in terms of struggling. And Jenkins revealed to DeMichael and the other media present that the Grizzlies have not practiced in 2 to 3 weeks because of weather cancellations and the craziness of their schedule in January. Now, when you're as young as the Memphis Grizzlies, if you're going through a cold stretch and you don't have the opportunity to get in the gym and get up shots, to work through and walk through things with your coaches, watch film and apply what you see on film, because I'm sure the Grizzlies watch film even when they don't practice, but to not be able to take what you see and learn and apply it on the floor physically, that's what these guys have been doing their entire lives, right? They go and they actively, physically put into play what they are taught in a classroom setting or in a film session. You take, you model, you apply. They haven't had that chance in several weeks. I'm fairly confident in saying, while that may not be the main reason they're losing, you don't want to discredit the play of the teams that they're facing. It isn't helping the Grizzlies' cause, right? Between that and health, I think there's a real concern in terms of they have to get their feet back under them. Thankfully, assuming they're off today after traveling after a back-to-back, they can practice Saturday. They play the Toronto Raptors Sunday. They have the Chicago Bulls on Tuesday, and then they're off Wednesday, Thursday of next week, going into a game on Friday against Minnesota. That's 3 home games in a row. And in case you've forgotten, the Grizzlies are one of the best home teams in the Western Conference, not just the Western Conference, the entire NBA. So even with the Portland loss that happened on Wednesday, I believe the Grizzlies only have 4 losses in the friendly confines of FedEx Forum. That enables them to feel confident. And usually your role players who the Grizzlies are going to be leaning on more with Steven Adams out, things of that nature, they can get a little bit more footing, right? They can feel themselves a little bit more in terms of rhythm when they're playing at home. So no more long road trip, at least not for now. 4 of the next 5 Grizzlies games are at home, and they only have to play, again, Sunday the 5th, Tuesday the 7th, Friday, February 10th. So it's a spread out schedule. They'll have some chances for practices, weather permitting. They will be able to address some of the concerns that they have, try to fix some of these issues, and again, apply what they're seeing in their meetings and their film sessions to on-court practice. It's hard to do that when the opponent changes and you have to have different variations of scheme, different calls, different types of coverages. All that can make things complicated in terms of trying to fix problems from previous games. This could be a chance for them to get their bearings again, which is extremely helpful. And I also think that it's important to point out that this is a group of guys who is missing Steven Adams, who, again, that hurts. Very important both offensively and defensively. But they're not going to miss him as much as they potentially could in terms of games lost because of the All-Star break coming up. Obviously, Ja Morant and Jaren Jackson Jr. are going to be busy during the All-Star break. But the Grizzlies play, again, 4 of their last 5 games before the All-Star break are at home. They play on Wednesday, February 15th, and then they're off for a week. They don't play again until they're in Philly on Thursday, February 23rd. You'd imagine that Steven Adams will be back by then. That would be around that 4 or 5 week mark. And Adams is a pretty tough cat. So I'd be surprised if he's not back to play against Joel Embiid on Thursday, the 23rd. But if you look at their schedule for the rest of February, the Memphis Grizzlies do not have another back-to-back until the end of the month when they play the Lakers at home on a Tuesday night, February 28th. And then on the first day of March, March 1st, they are at the Houston Rockets. So they do not have another back-to-back for a little less than a month. That matters tremendously because, again, you talk practice time. You talk the capacity to get your feet under you, to sleep in your own bed. The Grizzlies have multiple home games as part of that stretch. They're only on the road twice, as a matter of fact, in the month of February moving forward. Obviously, they were just in Cleveland on Thursday night. But the rest of the month, they only have 2 road games, one against Boston before the All-Star break, one in Philly after the All-Star break. So there's a chance here to get the gang back under the same roof, so to speak, to put everybody back on the same track, the same path, and rest, recover, review, and try to take the lessons learned from this current losing skid and put them to better use as room for growth. There's been a pretty negative tone, not just from Grizzlies Twitter and fans, but media-wise, the need for a trade, lots of different types of discussions at my old blog, grizzlybearblues.com. I think that it's important to understand and point out that, as I mentioned earlier in the show, there's a difference between contending and competing. The Grizzlies are competing admirably well. They're one of the youngest rosters in the NBA. In that specific way, they look more like the Orlando Magic or Detroit Pistons than the Milwaukee Bucks or the Denver Nuggets. Yet here they are in the same conversation as those 2 teams and others at the top of the National Basketball Association. We can say up and down all we want that the team is trying to contend, but the front office continues to put themselves in a position, understandably so, to try to navigate the high wire act that is not sacrificing the future for the sake of the present. The window is open longer, in theory, if you are able to maintain that balance, put yourself in a position to trade up in drafts, contracts that are controlled and cheap for rookies. All of that makes sense. However, at what point does it become detrimental? At what point do you make the choice to put your chips in, not even all your chips? Would I trade Zaire Williams and 3 first-round picks for OG Anunoby? Probably not, to be honest with you. I don't know that that's good value. You could probably do better, or at least you should be able to do better than an OG Anunoby. And OG Anunoby would be really good for these Memphis Grizzlies, a really good player. But is he the all-in move? Because 3 first-round picks and parting with your best, or one of your best, if you are salty at Zaire, I will say your best prospect, and Zaire Williams, that's your all-in move. That is you saying, I am ready to contend now. The Cleveland Cavaliers did that for Donovan Mitchell, a little bit bigger of a name. Hopefully you see the point I'm getting at. Obviously, that was a larger transaction, but the fact remains, if the Grizzlies are going to do that sort of deal, one, that scope may not exist, And B, in the absence of it, if a team like Toronto is trying to get you to overpay for an OG Anunoby, maybe you go the route that DeMichael and I talked about on our trade deadline episode. Maybe you go Alex Caruso, Alec Burks, Josh Richardson. Maybe those are guys that make sense. Sadiq Bey. And you could probably get those guys without moving on from Zaire or Danny Green or Dylan Brooks. And you keep the core of what you thought your team would be intact while expanding your depth. That's possible. You can take Jake LaRavia, who looks very out of place right now, needs development. He's not going to be in the mix for these Grizzlies right now. Prospect, first-round pick and a second-round pick. Does that get you Sadiq Bey? Maybe. Maybe. Does that get you Kobe White from Chicago? Absolutely. 100%, I think. I don't think Chicago blinks twice. That's probably too much for him. Hopefully, you're seeing the point. The continued flexibility is extremely valuable. When do you cash in some of those chips? Maybe we get the answer this weekend. It'll be really interesting to watch play out. I know I will be watching, and I know you will be too. Thanks for making Locked On Grizzlies your first listen today. Now make your second listen game-to-game NBA. Every moment, every top performance, every result. Locked On Game-to-Game covers every game from across the NBA with local analysis that only Locked On can deliver. Follow Game-to-Game on Locked On NBA. It's available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. The next time we are back together here on the Locked On Podcast Network for an episode of Locked On Grizzlies, the Grizzlies will have just played the Toronto Raptors. I wonder if OG Anunoby conversation will come up. I would imagine it will. We'll talk about how that game goes. We'll get to Michael's take on these last couple of games since he hasn't been able to join us. And we'll look ahead to a February, again, a little bit more spaced out, a little bit more stable. Hopefully the weather cooperates and the Grizzlies can get their feet under them again. I said it multiple times, but I think that's just the metaphor, the proverb, whatever, that just settle. Catch your breath. Focus on what has made you great to this point in terms of internal development and continue to grow. It's hard to do that when you don't have a chance to practice. And I think that will make a world of difference just in terms of getting up shots and finding a rhythm. But again, addressing problems, applying lessons physically on the practice court, I think that's going to make a world of difference. Hopefully we see that on Sunday. We'll talk about that at the start of next week here on Locked On Grizzlies. But until then, thank you so much for rating, reviewing, subscribing, liking, commenting on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. To Michael and I really appreciate it. Keep making Locked On Grizzlies a part of your Memphis Grizzlies and NBA experience. Until next time, have a wonderful weekend. I appreciate you joining me here on this episode. I'm Joe Mullinax. Stay locked in, Grizzlies fans. This is Locked On Grizzlies.